It's going.
All right. Keith Smith, Found Without Local reporter, working with covering the stories for you for the Democrat primary. It's coming up in a couple weeks. And we're here today with Piatt, who's running for the 4th District Congress seat to go up against Thomas Massey this November. And we've had some questions that's been submitted by various Democrat voters, and just wanted to sit down and have a conversation with you. Welcome to Pendleton County. Welcome to Found Without.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't you go ahead and tell a little bit about who you are?
I'm Patty Piatt. I live in Bellevue, Kentucky. I was raised in Florence, Kentucky. My family has been in this area since the 1790s. We have Piatt Park over in Cincinnati and Piatt's Landing, so my roots go strong. And my brother-in-law was actually a state trooper here for a while, and my sister lived in Falmouth, so I've actually spent some time here.
Well, cool. So you remember Florence Mall when it was a farm?
Actually, my father was a zoologist, and when they drained the pond to put the farm in, my father and I went, I was a little bitty, to get turtles and rescue wildlife there.
Well, that's cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah. That's a good story to tell. Yeah, because a lot of the generation today, they don't know anything about a commercial development there.
Yes, yeah. When we moved there, there was nothing past Main Street. Yeah. So now when I drive out to Union and Burlington, and that was all just farm.
And now it's business after business all the way to Union. It's pretty much much different. Well, let's go ahead and get started. One of the questions I want to start out with, I checked this morning. Ken Lucas was a Democrat that served in the seat back, I think 2005 was his last year. Over the last 13 years, that seat's been held by Republicans. And with Pendleton County going Republican on a lot of the races, it seems that there's something about the Democrat message that's just not resonating right now with Pendleton County voters. So I wanted to pose you that question: is what do you think it is about the Democrat message that the Pendleton County voters are just not resonating with?
Well,
and a follow-up question is, why are you the Democrat candidate to overcome that?
Well, there are a few things. We haven't had a Democrat in a while who's made the time to come to the counties. Also, as I said, I've spent time in Pendleton County. As far as the district goes, I'm very familiar with and have spent time in a lot of the counties. It's not even a matter of Republican or Democrat at this point. It's a matter of people not feeling like they're being heard. And I think that the Republicans were better at getting that message across than we were. Our current representative is an incredibly extreme libertarian. And he votes no on almost everything, and he doesn't make the time to come to talk to voters, and doesn't vote largely the way the majority of his district would like for him to.
Okay.
So I think that that's part of the message, part of our original messaging issue, and how we're bringing that forward now.
Okay. All right, and I'm going to be making notes as we go, because I'll be writing a story going on.
Did I hit both parts of the question?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, you did talk about that you're making the time to come to the counties and listen to the counties. Is that why you feel like you're the candidate that can overcome that, what seemed to be a little bit of a pattern going on?
And also, one of the reasons I think that, and I think the strongest reason, is that Washington, there isn't anybody in Washington who's lived the lives we've lived.
Okay.
And I was a single mother. I lived paycheck to paycheck. I've been to the grocery store with $20 to feed the family for a week. I was able to work my way up to the middle class, so I'm able to bring a perspective that there's no one that's representing us right now in Washington who understands.
Gotcha. All right. Moving on. One of my personal frustrations is the political culture.
Yes.
Is so negative anymore. On the Republican side, they have George Soros and Saul Alinsky as the big bad boogeymen. On the Democrat, it's the Koch brothers are the big bad boogeymen. And it seems like it's a culture to scare people into voting rather than a culture of a vision of this is where I'm going to take us to. Kind of a two-part question again. How can we ever get away to candidates or campaigning leading rather than what we're in now.
Absolutely, and I think that's what's brought the huge wave of Democrats jumping into the election right now. Listen, if Republican or Democrat, if somebody proposes something that's good for the state of Kentucky, I'm going to agree with them. Right now, Mitch McConnell is putting forward some legislation that would deregulate hemp. That would be wonderful for this state. I don't care who proposes the legislation. If it's going to help Kentucky, then I'm going to support it. The other thing is that if we look at the reality, I don't know if you're Democrat or Republican.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to ask you. We're just going to talk.
Mm-hmm.
This is how everyday people live. If I'm in the grocery store and the lady in front of me drops something, I'm not going to ask her politics before I pick it up. That's not how we live, and in Kentucky we aren't those people. Certainly there are those people who are that polarized. But the reality is that we aren't every day. The online and the vitriol that we see isn't the reality of our everyday lives.
Yeah.
I've had flat tires and been by myself, and nobody's once asked me who I voted for before they helped me.
I like that. Yeah. That's a great point. And it is amazing. I've always held the, and this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but just having a conversation, I've always held the view that I think back in the early 90s when Ted Turner created CNN,
Yes.
and it became 24/7 news, and instead of a 30-minute newscast that had to be reported, all of a sudden they had to fill 24 hours.
Well, then Reagan got rid of the fairness doctrine.
Yeah, yes.
So both of those things, absolutely, and I agree 100%. The 24-hour news cycle changed politics, and so much of what we see, I don't care what station you watch, they got to fill time. So they're gonna. It's conjecture and they're guessing. It's like watching the pregame for the Super Bowl every day.
Oh, good analogy. Yeah. Yeah.
And so everybody's guessing on what's going to happen and who did what, but until the game's played, we don't know.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Two issues that you currently, and this was one a lifelong Democrat submitted this question. What are two issues that you currently agree with according to the legislation and policies of Donald Trump? And then the follow-up question will be two areas that you disagree.
I'm going to go with, because he can only sign legislation that's put forth to him, and so I'm going to go back to McConnell, and I agree with the hemp legislation.
Okay.
And that's something that I hope and I assume that Trump will support, because if McConnell puts it forward, absolutely. There was another piece of legislation that came up yesterday with McConnell that would send opioid rehab and opioid addiction money to help relieve that problem into the state. So those are things I can get behind. I hope that President Trump will do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Again, he can only sign the legislation that's put before him.
Yeah.
Things that I don't agree with, DACA.
Okay.
I think that children who are brought here when they're young deserve the up. They didn't ask to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And these are students and productive young people who are adding to our economy, who can't be here if they break a rule or break a law.
Yeah.
So we need that. We need the DACA recipients to be safe and not worry about every day about.
Gotcha. Okay. Another issue? Did you disagree with him?
Not happy with lifting the EPA regulations. And as far as Kentucky goes, that's a huge hit here. We've got potash back in our streams already. We've got wild and scenic river status because of the EPA. The EPA has actually really helped the people of Kentucky, and him pushing to lift those regulations is going to hurt Kentucky disproportionately from other states.
Okay. I think we have a question later about coal, so we'll probably hit back upon that one a little bit. Actually, that's the next question. Stance of removal of the artificial restrictions and promotion of coal industry that benefits Kentucky and energy independence for the United States.
You're in that one by me one more time.
Okay. The person said that, what is your stance on the removal of artificial restrictions, is what they refer to it as, and then also promoting the coal industry that would benefit Kentucky. And then if we're able to use coal, I'm assuming what they're meaning, we can become more energy independent by using coal instead of things we're getting from overseas.
It's not gonna happen. We have, and it's not a matter of regulation, it's a matter of market. It's a matter of demand, and right now, natural gas is cheaper. We need to look past coal, and we need to have people who are in Washington who quit saying that they're gonna bring coal back because it's unfair to the people of Kentucky, because it's just not realistic. But we do have other options to transition from coal to renewable energy that could provide jobs for people who have lost theirs to,
Okay.
in the coal industry.
What would be some of those that you would want to see if you could bring to Kentucky to help replace those?
I would love to see solar. We can manufacture parts of solar panels here. To install a solar panel, it takes a master electrician and several other very skilled tradespeople. It would also help us, there are people like Google and Amazon who want solar energy, and that's not coming in, we're not bringing those businesses into Kentucky because we don't have that capacity. So it's a win-win for everybody. It's economically sound, it's good for our environment, and it will produce jobs exponentially.
Gotcha. And of course, it can't be a political interview
Sure.
without a question about abortion.
Sure.
So what is your position on abortion on demand in the third trimester?
Nobody wants that. Let me preface this by saying, I had my first child when I was 17. I sat in that seat and was given all that information, and I had to make that choice. And it would have been it wouldn't have been a third trimester, but it would have been, and I chose not to do that.
So you received all the abortion information?
I got the information about the abortion, was told exactly, and this is what happens, and people aren't really aware of it because I've been there, and I'm gonna share that experience. Here's what happens if you keep the baby, here's what happens, and here's how we would do it if you chose to have an abortion, and here are resources if you want adoption. And I sat in Planned Parenthood, and they told me all of this. I couldn't have an abortion, but I'm going to tell you that there's not a woman who uses a late-term abortion. It's a very, very small percentage, and that's not something a woman does lightly. So I would never make that decision. I know that there are women who have been forced to carry dead fetuses to term because they can't, and then have to go into labor and actually have that child. And so in the meantime, they're pregnant with a child they know isn't going to live.
Yeah.
So I can't make that decision for them. I would never do that. So I support letting women make that decision.
For them, and support them being allowed to make the decision.
Correct.
Okay. Individually, we all have strived to balance our personal budgets every week, every day. In DC, they seem to have a different mindset, and going deep into debt, where we do that. I mean, everybody's funny because everybody's like, well, we have to balance our finances. Well, we don't really. We get a home loan, we get a car loan, we go into debt also, but we do have to pay those bills eventually at some point in time. So the question is, it's a two-part question, with the deficit spending just being rampant, how do you balance a budget in DC?
I was a businesswoman for years and years, and I was responsible for multi-million-dollar budgets. And so every time I see them in DC balance the budget, I think, if I did it that way, I would have lost my job. You have to look at where you're spending money and they consistently go to the same social programs, as if those are the only financial expenditures that they have. We all know that's not true. And they're just, to me, this is lazy governance. Instead of taking the time to go through the budget to find out, and we've got people spending millions of dollars on travel in this administration. There are ways we could cut the fat without hurting people. And we could also raise revenue, because you and I are paying more taxes than the Waltons and the people who own Walmart. And yet we're paying benefits, because their people don't earn a living wage, we're paying benefits for all of those people.
Yeah.
So the math doesn't quite work out there. And I think that that's something we need to look, and I would look at. And as far as budgeting, I, single parent, lived paycheck to paycheck. I got in as much debt as I could afford to get into. And that's what most of us do. Yeah, I've got a mortgage, but I didn't buy more house than I could afford, and I didn't buy more car than I could afford, and that's how I've survived, and that's how most of us survive.
You mentioned sources of new revenue. What would be some of them?
Well, I think our tax code is skewed to people who in the 1%. And already Marco Rubio has come out, and several other Republicans have come out and said that this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Trickle-down economics has never worked. Giving tax breaks to the wealthiest 1% does not translate into jobs for people like you and I. So I think those people need to pay their fair share. I think we need to take a really long, hard look at the loopholes that we've created for those people that allow them to not pay. I'm paying my taxes, and I'm happy to do that to support our schools and to support our roads and to support education, and they're getting the benefit of all of those things that we're paying for without actually paying for them.
Okay. Well, in the last presidential election, and I think it was more on the Republican side, there was a lot of conversation on flat tax. In our tax structure, to me, one of the people that gets rich are tax accountants. Because anytime DC passes a new tax, they get paid more money by the wealthy to say, find me a way to get out of this.
Absolutely.
What about a tax structure that, like you said, gets away from loopholes, does a flat tax that they can't get out of?
We'd have to, I would absolutely support that. However, they've created a tax code that's so complex that it's going to take more than just that. It's going to take some serious hard work and rolling up your sleeves and taking a look at why it's better, why we are allow people to send money offshore and keep it there, because they'll still use that to keep from paying taxes. So I think it's a more complicated question, but we need to work towards a tax code that's fair for everyone.
Because, I think, and those who do have more means, yeah, that's a fair statement to say they should provide because they've been blessed. But at the same time, you don't want to penalize somebody for working their rear off and making it a better situation for them. So it's a hard balancing act. Like you said, very complicated, very complex issue.
It is, and I think I don't mind paying my share. The fact that companies like Walmart are not only personally not paying their fair share, their corporations have been given huge tax breaks, and you and I are paying because those people who work hard for a living can't afford daycare or are on food stamps or their children are on Medicaid. And that's an issue. So there's no fairness in my eyes.
And you can't afford a tax accountant to tell us how to get out of it.
Exactly. We're online doing our 1040A. So I think that to me just seems completely unfair and in a way unjust, particularly to the people who are working hard to help the Waltons and the Walmarts of the world make that money.
Absolutely. Second part of this question. How do you, and this is a hard one, to me, it's a hard one, is because you're a representative, and you're one of a lot of representatives. And the way our government structure is, you've got to show this district how you're benefiting this district, which means projects with monies attached to them coming back. Well, that's been one of the things that's ran the deficit out of control, is all these earmark spending. So how do you balance that as a representative, where you want to bring things back to your district, but as a country, you know we need to be frugal in our spending?
Well, historically, the government has a vital role in our economy. So if we look at the things that you and I just talked about, and also look where the money's going somewhere. You know, we need a bridge in northern Kentucky. You know, 3% of our gross domestic product goes across that bridge. I'm driving these roads, we need roads. Those would create jobs, and those people would pay taxes. We can create some skilled jobs, living wage jobs right now. So it's not a matter of increasing the deficit, it's a matter of looking where our money's going now. Do we need to spend what we are in the military? Absolutely, I support our troops, I want them to have what they need, but that's a disproportionate amount of our budget.
You said it was a
Disproportionate amount of our budget,
yeah. Obviously, my goodness, was there a hotter topic in the last election than immigration? You touched upon it with DACA. And so basically, what do we need to do on immigration?
Immigration is at an all-time low, illegal immigration. There are jobs.
And I should have put in illegal immigration. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't support immigration. I should have said illegal.
But some of the restrictions now are actually hurting us. You know, we've got people farmers who don't have help to bring their crops in. Their crops are rotting in the field.
Well, there's help there because I grew up working on farms.
Yeah.
And there's help there available. We just may have generations now who don't want to go do those things. Yeah.
Well, and yeah, I've set tobacco, and I've worked.
So you've been on the setter and putting those little plants down there, and probably played in the mud.
Well, it was, you know, that's what we did. But you're right, it's a different generation. We also, you know, there are jobs, and part of the immigration problem is the targeting of countries and saying, you know, we're not going to allow people in from these countries when we need skilled people and who we don't have here. And we rely on those countries, and we rely on those skilled people to come in. I support, like I said, DACA, and I think that we need to make that path easier for them to become legal citizens. It takes a very, very long time. I don't support deporting people who have served our country.
Okay. And you're talking about in the military?
In the military,
okay.
Because that's been happening. And I don't support them breaking up families. So, I mean, to me, these are humanitarian issues. We need to make it easier for people to become legal. It's a very long, expensive process to become a legal immigrant. And the majority of the people who are illegal came here on visas and just stayed.
Yeah.
So it's not people crossing the border in mass. The problem is mostly people who come here legally.
Gotcha. And
then just stay.
Yeah. So what should be done with those? They come to college, they attend college here, and then they just stay.
Right. And they.
What's your stance on what should be done there?
I think that they need to be given a path to immigrate to legal status. I worked in higher ed for years with some of those students, some of those very students, and they would stay, but they were working, and they were productive. And I think that those people need to be given a pathway to citizenship, the same way the DACA students are. I don't think that, I think that we need to take a long look at the process, because it is arduous and it's expensive.
It's right back to what we said with the tax accountant.
Same
The
thing.
people who could afford to do it are not the problems, the ones, yeah.
Exactly. So to me, that's, in making that process easier
Mhm.
and accessible, a lot of these problems would resolve.
Looking at it from a global standpoint, is there a benefit that even though they want to stay, that, part of the purpose for them coming to this country to get education was obviously to benefit themselves,
Mhm.
but also a thought process that they would return, the doctors would return to their
Mhm.
country. The vastly intelligent person that's over here studying will return to raise their country
Mhm.
up. How do you balance that out with the status here, but knowing it would be best also for them to go to work and become a leader in their country?
Well, I think we need to encourage our own students to do that.
Okay.
And
You mean Americans going overseas?
No, I mean Americans, education, and that level of education is unattainable for most Americans, and people who come out of medical school and law school and, with advanced degrees in engineering, those people have a lot of debt.
Mhm.
So we're not making it easy for our own people to take that path.
I just wrote a check, $800 for an online class for
Yes.
my son to take 2 credit hours this summer.
Exactly.
$800. It's online.
Yeah.
He's not even using their building. But anyhow,
I'm
that's a
with,
rant.
but that's true. I think that the bigger problem isn't, because those people are going to come, they're going to be productive members of society, and they're going to go back.
Mhm.
But the bigger problem is, why aren't we making sure that we have, and there are shortages in doctors and not lawyers, we've got tons of those. But in some of these professions, and I would support a work for service sort of program where you go to medical school and then you come out to the rural counties and serve them. I think we need to prop up our own people first. To me, that's a bigger issue.
Gotcha. Yeah, and there's a lot of being a retired school teacher. I retired January of 2017 and started working here. There's a lot of teaching programs like that you
Mhm.
get your degree,
Yes.
you get a big signing bonus, and then you go to Alaska or different places and you
Exactly.
serve some time.
And Ohio used to do that, where if you went to an Ohio state school
Mhm.
for teaching and you stayed there and taught, I mean, this is a great program.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This one came in actually earlier this morning. President Trump brought it up in the election, and then he's brought it up, I think, this week. And I haven't read any story about it, but he's revisited the issue of term limits for legislators. We have term limits for the president, and so there's always a lot of conversation about term limit. Because you have a politician who's been there for 40 years. People assume they've sold out. Whether the assumption's right or wrong, that's the assumption. And people say that you shouldn't be up there the whole time.
I agree. I think that there are people who completely lose contact with the people that they're supposed to represent. I think term limits in both the House and the Senate would be, and I don't really know what that looks like,
Yeah.
to be honest with you. I really have to study it more. But I will tell you that a 2-year limit, or a 2-year being a representative and having to run again every 2 years, means that those people are spending most of the time fundraising for the next election. So I think that term needs to be increased. There do need to be term limits. And we need to take a good, long, hard look at what point do you quit being, and I think anybody who's been in a job, the same job for 30 years, knows at some point,
You're done.
yeah, you're just showing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it's the same thing.
Yeah. And when I retired, I could have stayed and maxed out my retirement and top, but it was time for me to go.
Yeah.
And I knew that.
Right.
I knew that it was time for me to go.
Right.
My dad and I have had this conversation because he's supportive of term limits, and when we started talking about what does that look like,
Mhm.
then he sees that, because it's like, okay, if you're gonna do 3 terms for a rep, well, okay, that's 6 years.
Mhm.
Then you're gonna do 2 terms for a senator, well, now that's, what is it, 6 years for a senator? So that's 12, well, now they've been there 18 years.
Yeah. Well,
So are you looking at it as different terms for the different positions?
Well, because they serve different purposes.
Mhm.
So to me, and really, Massey's been in there 6 years.
Uh-huh.
He hasn't done anything for the state of Kentucky, and that's demonstrable. He's never gotten a bill out of committee. He's not brought one penny back to this state. But also, there's a certain amount of time that it takes to get, I don't want to say tenure, but before you have to get some seniority before you get any power. So that's why, I think you need to look at it. Rand Paul's still called a junior senator.
Yeah, yeah.
So we need to look at how effective and how quickly can you get some, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, cred.
Mm-hmm. We're just understanding how the process
Right.
works.
I can't imagine, and the people that I'm running against who say within the first 6 months I'm going to do this, no, you aren't. In the first 6 months, you're not going to have that kind of power.
Yeah.
So it does take some time to get into the system, to understand the system, and we need to take that into account. And then the Senate does a very different job than the House of Representatives. So I think putting those two together, that's not my goal, is to go into the Senate. I want to stay in the House. But if it were, I'd be moving to a different job.
Gotcha.
So to me, that 18 years wouldn't seem too long. We should be into it. It's like getting promoted.
What committees would you want to be considered to serve in DC that you feel would be beneficial to the voters of the 4th district?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Agriculture. And I'd love to be on the Appropriations Committee, but so would everybody else. That'll never happen.
Yeah.
But my business background would really be helpful in that one. But I think with the farm bill that just passed and the tariffs, our farmers need somebody who's going to advocate for them in DC.
Yeah.
I really do.
And appropriations, for those that don't know, that's where the money's spent.
Yes,
That's
that's
who
the budget.
designates who's spending what.
And years of doing that, I'd be great at that, but hate me on that.
But and I've found out to being an athletic director, being a coach, sometimes to do the job the way it's supposed to be done, you make people mad.
Yep, I'm used to that.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're supportive of McConnell bringing the issue of hemp, and the beneficial that it would be for the farmers in Kentucky. What about marijuana? We're seeing across the nation states make recreational, medical. Where do you stand?
I think medical marijuana is incredibly important to this state. And what I've been telling people is that we start with hemp, because that's gonna happen quickly, I think. And hemp is a $200 billion a year import right now.
You mean $200 billion we bring in from other countries?
We are importing $200 billion of hemp and hemp products. So let's start with hemp, and let's get ready, because hemp, it grows quickly. We're uniquely suited to grow hemp. That was our major cash crop back in Henry Clay was a hemp farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to medical marijuana. And I support recreational marijuana.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on that? Okay. What's the federal goal? Of course, man, it's been a heck of a year, last 3 months in education in Kentucky,
Yes.
and then Arizona and Oklahoma and West Virginia.
Yes.
What do you see as the federal government's role in education?
Well, first of all, Thomas Massey has put legislation forward to get rid of the Department of Education. At this point, seeing the state of education, in Kentucky, there are classrooms that have one textbook. So I think there is a role for the federal government to play. We certainly don't, the Department of Education doesn't set curriculum. But we've got to fully fund education, and we've got to make that happen, whether it's at state level, and there are federal funds that go into schools.
Mm-hmm.
A well-educated population is good for everybody. and why anyone would continue to have this battle on education, and charter schools have been historically ineffective.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question for
Yeah.
that. Because this is, to me, one of the frustrations that I have in politics is that they cherry pick, for lack of a better term, certain issues.
Mhm.
And of course, one side is just being lambasted about charter schools, but Obama actually and the Democrats put charter schools into play. And he used them in his education plan. So it's both sides who
Oh,
look
yeah.
at this issue and have wanted to use it. What is your stance
Well,
on charter schools?
You know, again, this is about what's good for the people of Kentucky.
Okay.
I don't care who proposed it. You know, I'm not of the somebody's always right and somebody's always wrong state of mind. I look at this as a person who grew up in Kentucky and,
Yeah.
and you know, went to public schools until high school. Charter schools don't work. They have very rarely lived up to expectations, and the majority of them, if you do the homework and look at the statistics, they're bad for education. This is an attempt to privatize yet another industry, and they're looking at our children as an industry to put money in the pockets, not of educators, but of people who would view it as a business, and that's wrong. I don't care who proposed it.
Gotcha. Well, and you know, it's funny because in what I have said, publicly said, was a politically genius move. President Obama's report on his education plan was exactly what you said. Charter schools didn't work.
Yeah,
It didn't
they
work.
didn't.
And he released that plan 2 days before Trump's inauguration. So you can imagine it got no play anywhere.
And it's
But he found that out. Charter schools doesn't work.
They don't work, and in a lot of cases, they are tools for segregation. You know, we're not talking about putting all the high achieving students in. You know, magnet schools serve us much better. I love the magnet school system.
Explain we don't have magnet schools
Okay.
here in Hilton County.
Yes.
So explain the difference between a magnet school and a charter school.
Magnet school is a public school that my son went to, for example, Stonewall Elementary in.
Now, the law as it passed here in Kentucky, the charter school would be a public school too.
Right, but
Yeah.
but it's privately run.
Yes, okay.
Which means it's not publicly funded. And the magnet schools are, in Lexington, there's a school for creative and performing arts.
Mhm.
That's still a public school.
Yeah.
My son went to Stonewall Elementary, which was a traditional magnet. There are Spanish immersion programs, and these are all public schools run with public school money
Mhm.
that you get in a lottery to get your kid in, that do very, very well. The magnet school systems that are in place in Jefferson County, DuPont Manual is a magnet school. And it is a model, it is an incredible school that provides a great education on public money.
Yeah. Well, now, and that's one of the things though with charter schools, the way they set up in Kentucky, it would be
It would be
for
public
public money, and that's one of the things that you're taking public money away from us to go
To give
fund
it to a
these.
private company to run your school.
Well,
Yeah, because we're already getting, my husband and I are getting in our email, do you want to buy a charter school franchise?
well, but it has to be set up by the local school districts. The Board of Education of Campbell County would have to, or Highlands or whoever it may be,
Right.
would have to be the one to determine to set it up, except for, I think for whatever stupid reason, they put the mayors of Louisville and Lexington also create that. But
Right.
for the rest of us, it would be a Board of Education that
But
would
did
have
you
to
see what they
determine
just
that.
did to Jefferson County Public Schools?
I saw that. Yeah,
That's
I've been
what's
watching
gonna,
that.
that's what's
Yeah.
gonna happen, and that's the plan.
Yeah.
It was never intended.
Yeah, Neil and I was
Yeah.
talking about that last week, that Bevan's let the next shoe drop on what he's doing here and been following along.
Yeah, and yesterday they announced or day before yesterday, they were gonna take over,
Mhm.
and that's what's gonna happen, so if,
I think that was the recommendation from the interim. I haven't
Right.
read to
It
see
is, you're
if
right.
that
You're
final
right.
decision's been
No.
made, but that was gonna be his recommendation.
but it'll happen, we
Yeah.
all know it's gonna happen, we knew it was gonna happen a month ago.
Mhm.
So, this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. Again, this isn't about what's best for our kids.
I would agree with that. I would agree with
You know,
that.
this is an attempt to privatize education.
And of course, this is retired school teacher.
Yes.
This is dear to my heart. But what about and obviously I'm going to use a word here that you're going to say, oh, okay, I know where he stands on it. What about the overemphasizing of standardized testing in our school districts today? You know, we had federal tests that we had to take, and you know, you can say what you want, but we were teaching tests.
Oh, I know,
Because
yeah.
that determined whether the state was going to come in and take us over. It created a system, you had no choice locally. You don't have a lot of say in what you have to do because you don't want the state to come in and take you over.
Yeah, that is, I think, a huge issue, and I don't think anybody who's a teacher, who's a parent, or who had to sit and take that test, found it helpful or productive. And I was with a group of teachers the other day who had just been to see another program and how they're running schools in other areas, and I think we have a lot to learn, and that we can change our focus into educating our children instead of performance, because every kid's not going to perform. There's an assumption that everyone can at the same time be at the same level, and that's not how people work.
Yeah.
So I think it's untenable.
Well, you know, my dad is a heart transplant recipient. And when we were sitting there after he received his heart, you know, he and I were talking. I said, Dad, I'm just glad there's smarter people in the world than me. Because if it was left up to me to figure out how to do what they did to you, you wouldn't have got that.
Everybody has their own.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
Nothing wrong with it.
No, and I think that it takes that out of the equation. You know, I'm good at what I do. It doesn't mean that I can represent you in a lawsuit. You know, it's everybody has their own talents.
Yeah, very true, very true. Another issue, and actually the last two issues, is I don't think you'll ever get through an election for a while without addressing these two issues.
Sure.
Stance on Second Amendment. What do you think the Second Amendment guarantees a voter here in our district?
I'm a gun owner.
Okay.
I come from a family of hunters and gun owners. I support the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court has said that it does not mean the right is unrestricted. And I agree. So, yes, a 72-hour waiting period to get a gun should not be, it does not infringe upon anyone's Second Amendment rights. I don't think military-style assault weapons infringe on anybody's right to bear arms, and the Supreme Court has held that. Common sense, gun laws. None of us gun owners, nobody I talk to says, no, I don't want a background check.
Yeah.
Now, this is, the majority of Americans, gun owners and non-gun owners alike, support stronger background checks, waiting periods.
Yeah, it seems like the ones who don't support the background checks are the ones who know they will pass.
Right, exactly.
So, and there's a reason for it. What kind? You said you're a gun owner. What do you have? What do you own?
I have a Kimber Mini 9mm. My husband had a Glock, and it's way too big for me. So, this is a great gun. It fits in my hand. It's easy to shoot. So yeah, I have a Kimber 9mm.
All right. And then the last one that I have, healthcare.
Oh yes.
Like I said, the last two.
Oh well, no. This is an important part of why I'm running. When Kentucky was the model for success of the ACA, and the Republicans worked to, and this is one of the few times you'll hear me talk about Republicans and Democrats, but worked to repeal it 61 times. When costs were going down and coverage was going up. $500,000 Kentuckians benefited from the ACA. And the majority of Americans supported continuing and fixing the ACA. But the Republicans didn't want that and weren't listening. Thomas Massey voted against the bill, the healthcare bill, because it didn't cut far enough. I think everyone should be able to see a doctor when they're sick. And that we need to work towards Medicare for all. You know, we've already got the single payer system in place. It would economically benefit businesses to not have to have that, which is a huge expenditure. In that, again, we're talking about doing budgets. That's one of the highest fixed costs a business has. So not only would people be healthier, it would help the economy. People say, well, it's going to get more expensive. Well, if you're paying $1,200 a month, like the average family, I think, is paying for healthcare now, and that goes down to $400 in taxes, because we've got everybody in the pool, everybody wins. I don't see any downside.
Gotcha. Okay. And what do you think in your position as representative you can do to address that or help that or push that forward?
Well, there were already bills put forward, so putting your support behind that bill, and I would love to be at the table. I think anytime, I don't want to live in a world where one party makes all the decisions for everybody. I know that I'm, in the business world, if we had an issue, bringing everybody to the table, whether we agreed or not, to discuss it, we would come up with a better solution. This entire culture of hiding behind closed doors and throwing something out before anybody has to read it it's lazy. The people who voted on that bill don't even know what's in it. That's not how we govern.
Yeah, but that's how we got the other one too.
Right.
What was it? I mean,
Well,
and it's both parties have done
Well,
that.
actually, there were multiple hearings over a long period of time, and the Republicans and the Democrats both worked on the ACA. So that wasn't done behind a closed door. That was actually brought to the floor like under regular procedure.
Don't we have the legendary comment of Pelosi? We have to vote on this so that we know what's in it, though. When she voted on that, she made the comment, we have to vote past this.
I don't think anybody read that.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Who
Yeah,
could?
who could?
Golly, yeah.
But there were hearings.
Yeah.
And multiple hearings, and it's either 70 or 170, and I can't remember right now, but there were multiple hearings with both sides. Wasn't this go behind the closed doors? And, I mean, even Rand Paul wanted to know what was in the bill.
Yeah.
So this was done without even their own, so
I see what you're
that's the
saying,
difference.
public hearings and those kind of things.
Right,
Gotcha,
right.
I got you.
Right, you mean even the Republicans didn't know it was in
Yeah.
it, they weren't allowed in the closed hearing.
Gotcha.
That's no way to make a law.
Yeah.
That affects,
For sure.
that affects everyone.
Yeah.
There are very few laws that created that affect every single person. That one certainly did.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what do you want the Democrat voters, we're about, and what are we, 20 days away?
Yes.
From the election. What do you want the voters in Pendleton County to know? And the last thought about you as they're going into that booth, what do you want them to know?
That I'm going to listen, that I'm tired of the gridlock. I'm, just like everyone else, I'm fed up with what's going on in Washington. I want to represent everyone. And once you get elected, doesn't matter. Everybody, you represent everyone in your district, everyone in your state.
Not just your voters, everyone.
Everyone.
That's what you're saying?
Right, everything you do impacts the entire state. So, having legislators that don't have town halls, that won't show up, that won't listen, you know, I'm gonna do that, because I know that that's the best way to serve the people of Kentucky.
Gotcha.
And that's my intent, is to serve.
Cool. Well, we appreciate you coming
Thank
down
you.
and spending a little time. Welcome to Falmouth, and hopefully you enjoyed your drive down. Everybody thinks it's this long drive.
Oh, no, it's
a really easy
like
drive
45
down.
minutes.
Yeah, it's not bad.
One of the best things about living in northern Kentucky is the district is long. We have 120 counties. It goes from East Jefferson to Boyd County. And living in Bellevue, I'm about an hour and a half 2 hours from the farthest parts of the district.
Wow,
And this was
that's not
45 minutes.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get stuck in traffic in Cincinnati that long.
That's very true. Yeah, you know, it's funny because people will come out here and say, I can't, you live so far out, how do you live so far out? We go up there and sit in traffic and go, how do they sit and do this?
Yeah, it's the
So
same
we both complain about traffic, it's just what it is.
This is a much prettier drive.
Oh, thank you very
Yes,
much.
yeah.
We enjoy our drive. Well, thank you, and to let our viewers know and our readers that we're hoping to have more of these as we go on through the primary and the general election in November.
And please, remember, May 22nd, get a vote in the primary. Thank you.
Thank you.